Okay, so today we're going to be talking through some new publishing under our ELT list. More specifically, we'll be looking at the practice tests for the Cambridge English qualifications. So as you can see here, we have 4 titles publishing under this series, 2 for the KET exams and then 2 for the PET exams, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. So the A2 Key and the B1 Preliminary published in March of 2020, and then the A2 for schools and the B1 for schools will be publishing in June of 2020. So essentially today we're just going to give you a little bit of an insight into the key features of these titles, how they're designed to support both students and teachers inside a classroom setting and also outside a classroom setting. We'll be looking at how the curriculum changes for 2020 are reflected in these titles, and then we'll finish up just by giving you a little look inside the books to give you a bit of an idea about the format, give you a bit of a taste for the design and just generally how they look. So to begin, we'll take a look at the KET and PET exams. Many of you will probably be familiar with these already. They're very much recognised around the world by employers, universities and government ministries as proof of one's ability to use English. So just to take a look at the KET exams first, these are targeted towards those studying at a pre-intermediate level, and then the PET exams essentially are the next level up. So these are designed for those studying to an intermediate level. However, the structure and the format of the exams are very similar in that they each have a reading, a writing, a listening and a speaking component. So moving on to the curriculum changes in 2020. So the new exams very much reflect the changes to the English language and also changes within the classroom. So how English is taught, how people study this within a classroom. And just to look at a few specific points, so some of the new tasks at Key and Preliminary are deliberately similar to the level above. And the idea here is that it gives learners the chance to build on skills they've developed at one level as they move up to the next. So essentially really giving learners the opportunity to consolidate that knowledge as they move through the different levels in these exams, and hopefully this makes for a bit more of a seamless progression from level to level. And then specifically looking at A2 Key, so a big change here is that students are being given the opportunity to demonstrate their speaking and writing skills more fully, so that then in the writing paper they have the opportunity to write more freely. And this is echoed in the speaking component where students are given the opportunity now to speak more freely. So they're quite key changes there in the curriculum. So similarly to the opening slide, just to give you an overview of the 4 titles publishing here. So we have the practice tests for A2 Key for schools, we've got the practice tests for A2, and then we've got practice tests for B1 Preliminary for schools, and the practice tests for B1 Preliminary. So just all your essential information there, your ISBNs and prices. So just to look at the difference between the 4 schools, and as we've kind of are branding them the non for schools titles. So these, they look very similar. They're very similar in terms of how they're structured. It may be fairly self-explanatory, but just to give you a bit of an overview. So the 4 schools tests are targeted towards primary and lower secondary age students. So therefore the context of the questions will be relevant to this age bracket. So for example, topics brought into the exams might be your family, your school and your hobbies. Whereas when you take a look at the non for schools titles, as these are targeted towards older test takers who might not be taking the test or doing the learning in a classroom environment, this means that the context of their questions cover topics relevant to their age. So it might be their job, it might be their flatmates, it might be different, more adult social settings when they go out and about, and things you do on the weekend. So it will really represent the changes in the age brackets there. So having a look at the key features for these practice tests. So there are now 8 new tests as opposed to 4 in the previous editions. So obviously this makes for a lot more material for learners to go through and to practice with. The speaking paper now has even more additional practice by topic and more sample questions. And obviously, as I've mentioned a couple of times, this does meet the new exam specification for 2020, so it's all fully up to date. And then we've got a lot of audio available online and also audio scripts to complement this at the back of the book. There's a useful phrases supplement for the writing and speaking sections. And then we've also got a co-build glossary of difficult vocabulary and a mini dictionary of difficult words from the test, also taken from our co-build dictionaries, which provides a little bit more support on trickier parts of the tests. And it really gives that full coverage across learning, sitting the practice tests, reviewing your own work when you sat those tests. So it is start to finish support. And then also there's a helpful guide to the exam with challenges and solutions for each part of the test. And we will have a look at this later on when we take a look inside the book. Okay, so as mentioned, these titles are designed to help students prepare for the real test. So they are made very true to life. The material and layout is designed to replicate the real test. And there's a lot of support, as I've previously mentioned. So the introduction contains a full guide to the different sections of the test. It gives you tips and practical advice on how to revise and prepare for the test. There are lots of sample answer sheets. There are visual materials and model answers and answer keys. So as mentioned, this does provide a great deal of coverage from actually sitting the practice test, before that, having prepared for it, and then afterwards when you're reviewing it and comparing your answers against the model answers and making improvements. So there's a lot of support material there for learners. So now to take a bit of a look inside these titles. So there's a how-to section at the beginning of each title. So as I discussed previously, this offers useful hints and tips on how to use the book effectively. So you've got tips for success here, tips on how to use this as a self-study resource, because obviously this goes right beyond a classroom setting when learners are using this resource at home and in their own time, or as mentioned at the beginning when we discussed the difference between the titles, for the non-for-schools titles, this is particularly important for people who might be undertaking self-study. So the format of each section of the paper is addressed, and as well as the skills that are needed to answer this effectively. So moving on, this is then followed by a tips page on how to prepare for the real test. And as shown here, this addresses common challenges and then solutions. So it looks at the timing, which is obviously very important when taking an exam. It looks at different strategies and options of how to address common challenges. So hopefully this is something that would prove very useful to those preparing for the real thing. Okay, so taking a look inside the practice tests for B1 preliminary, just to look at the writing section here. So this is an example question page. It has clear instructions and an engaging format. And obviously the questions are designed to mirror those of the actual test. So there will be different types of questions. They'll all look a bit different. And this is very much represented in the broad scheme of questions that are in these titles within the practice tests. And of course, as mentioned, there are model answers at the back of the book. So then to take a look at the practice test for A2 key, the reading and writing. So this displays a multiple choice answer. And again, that's something that's featured in the real test. So it gives a real broad overview and a broad insight into the different types of questions that you will see when sitting the real thing. And then to take a look at the practice test for B1 preliminary, the speaking section. So the additional practice by topic is offered as a supplementary resource, and this is at the end of the text. And again, this extends the support available for practicing students, so it really is a worthwhile element to these titles. So hopefully that's been useful in giving you a bit more of an insight into the new publishing for the practice tests. Of course, if you have any further questions from this, someone at Collins will be happy to discuss this a little more with you. So yeah, in the meantime, thank you very much.